Wyoming Territory, August 1887. The wind carried dust and loneliness across the high plains as Evelyn Tate stepped off the last mail wagon in Dry Creek with nothing but a threadbare satchel and a name no one cared to remember. She was too skinny, folks said. All sharp elbows and hollow cheeks, like she had been carved out of hardship itself. Her dress hung off her like it belonged to someone else. No family, no friends, and no welcome. Town's got no place for strays, the general storekeeper muttered when she asked for work. Try the boarding house. Maybe Miss Godfrey'll feed you. Miss Godfrey did for 3 days. Then Evelyn was told she was too much of a reminder of hunger. Too quiet, too pale, too strange. On the 4th day, she slept in the livery stable, curled up beside the warmth of the mule's flank. No one looked for her. No one missed her. Until the cowboy came. He rode in just after sundown, boots dusted, shirt damp from the ride, a single rifle slung behind his saddle. His horse was lean and dark with one white sock. He moved like he had lived through worse things than silence. He saw her in the stall when he went to stable his horse. "You hurt?" he asked, voice rough like creek stones. Evelyn blinked at him. "No, you got a home?" She shook her head. He crouched beside her, resting his forearm on his knee. "You got a name?" "Evelyn Tate." He nodded once. "Owen Oakes." She stared at him, waiting for the judgment, waiting for the look everyone else gave her, pity or disgust. But Owen just stood and reached into his saddlebag. He handed her half a biscuit and a canteen. "Eat. Then come with me." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Because no one should sleep next to a mule if they do not have to." He took her to the edge of town, to a small homestead nestled against the hills. Just a one-room cabin, a barn, and a chicken coop. He lit a lamp and pointed to the cot near the stove. "You can sleep there. I will take the barn. You do not even know me. You ain't stolen from me yet." He shrugged. "That is good enough for now." She should have said no. She should have run. But something in his voice, not kindness, exactly, steadiness, like he meant what he said and would not take it back. So she stayed. The next morning she tried to leave, quiet before he woke. But the door creaked, and he was already outside splitting wood. "You leaving? I do not want to be a burden." He wiped sweat from his brow, looked at her long. "You helping is not a burden. You feel like working?" "Yes." "Then stay." So she did. 1 day became 3. She fed the chickens, scrubbed the floor, patched a tear in his shirt. He did not thank her with words, just handed her a full plate at supper and looked her in the eye like she mattered. A week passed. Evelyn started looking less like a ghost. Her cheeks filled in. Her eyes steadied. Still, the town whispered. At church, women turned their backs. Men laughed behind hands. Too skinny. Too strange. Living with a man she was not married to? One woman spat near Evelyn's boots and said, "You will never be a wife. No man wants a scarecrow." Evelyn lowered her eyes. She did not speak of it to Owen, but he saw it in her silence that night. "You want to leave?" he asked. She shook her head. "This is the first place I have ever felt safe." He nodded, then looked her square in the eye. "Then I will fix it." The next Sunday he stood on the church steps with her beside him. "Told the preacher and the town, this is Evelyn Tate, and she is my wife." The crowd went quiet. She stared up at him, heart hammering. "You do not have to pretend," she whispered. "I am not." His hand found hers. "You are already everything I want." They married that same day beneath the cottonwoods behind the church. No ring, no music, just a promise and his voice steady against hers. That night he built a fire in the hearth and pulled her into his arms. "I meant it, Evelyn. You are my wife now, and I will never let you feel alone again." She pressed her forehead to his chest, breathing in the scent of smoke and pine and hope. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. And he meant it. The wind shifted with the season. By early September, the cottonwoods behind the cabin began to yellow at their edges, and Evelyn learned how to stitch warmth into things, linings in Owen's coats, extra batting in the quilt, a sense of home into the corners of a room that had once felt borrowed. In the mornings, she baked bread without being asked. The dough stuck to her fingers the first few tries, but by the end of the week, the crust browned just right, and Owen said nothing except to leave the heel slice on her plate. That was enough. One afternoon, after the sun had passed its peak, he brought her a bolt of blue calico. He laid it on the kitchen table like it was something rare. Figured you might want something decent to wear come winter, he said, his thumb resting on the edge of the fabric. She ran her fingers over it, the weave tight and clean. Where'd you get this? Traded for it with a man passing through from Laramie. Had some mule harness he needed mending. You didn't need to. I wanted to. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes on the floorboards. You've been making things better here. I notice. That evening, she sat by the lamplight with needle and thread, shaping the cloth into a dress that would fit her frame. Owen stayed outside longer than usual, tending something in the barn. When he came in, his hands were raw from the cold pump water, but he paused when he saw her, the fabric stretched across her lap. You good with a needle? He said, voice quieter than usual. I was the oldest, she replied, not looking up. Had to sew for the little ones when Ma got too sick. He didn't press for more. He just nodded and took his seat by the fire, the unspoken filling the room like smoke. They didn't speak of their pasts unless it came up like that in slanted ways. She'd learned he'd run cattle down near Rawlins before the drought pushed him north. That he'd buried a younger brother the same week he turned 20. These truths came out in pieces, never asked for, never refused. One morning, the rooster crowed late. Owen went out to check and came back with his jaw set. Something got into the coop, he said, setting his rifle near the door. 2 hens missing, 1 torn up. She pulled on her shawl and followed him. The prints in the dirt told a clear story, fox, maybe coyote. She knelt by the edge of the fence, pressing her fingers to the claw marks. You need me to fix the wire? She asked. I'll handle it, he said. Then after a breath, but I'd like you to keep watch while I do. So she stood on the porch that afternoon, the rifle across her arms. The wind tugged at her skirts and the clouds hung low, but nothing came. When he finished mending, he walked up beside her, his hands smudged with dirt. You look like you've always belonged here, he said. Her voice caught before she answered. I never belonged anywhere. You do now. They didn't touch, but he stayed beside her until the sun slipped behind the hills. Later, as she folded his shirts creased from the line, still warm from the sun, she found a small square of paper tucked into the pocket of one. A pencil sketch, rough but careful, of a bird on a fence post. It wasn't signed, but she knew the shape of his strokes. That night, after dishes were dry and the lantern trimmed low, she slid the drawing across the table to him. You did this. He nodded once. Why? He met her eyes. Because I saw you watching it. Thought maybe you'd want to keep the moment. Her throat tightened. She didn't speak. Just reached across the table, her hand finding his. He didn't pull away. Didn't say anything more. In the stillness, she knew this was how trust grew, not through grand gestures or loud declarations, but in the quiet offerings of a man who listened more than he spoke. And for the first time, she wondered what it would feel like to love someone who never needed to be told how to care. By the second frost, Evelyn had learned the rhythm of the land. Mornings came brittle and silver, smoke curling from the chimney before daylight rose. She kept the fire banked through the night now, waking just before Owen stirred, her hands quick with matches and kindling. The quiet between them had grown easy, full of wordless understanding. One night, she found him oiling the rifle by lantern light. He handled it with care, not out of fear but habit. She leaned against the doorframe, watching the lamplight catch on the steel. You fought somewhere, she said. He didn't look up. Montana Territory. Back when the Army paid cattlemen to scout trails and bring messages west of the Tongue River. She crossed the room and sat across from him, resting her elbows on the table. You lose anyone? He nodded once. A friend. Had a laugh like a cracked bell. Took a bullet crossing a dry creek. Not even a skirmish, just bad timing. She didn't ask for the name. Some things felt too close to the bone. You ever think about leaving? She asked. He set the rifle down slow. I used to. And now? Now I think about building another room on the cabin. She blinked. Why? You sew at the table. I carve there too. Thought maybe you'd want space for your own things. She didn't answer right away. Her throat closed up around the words. Later, when the lamplight had thinned and he'd gone to the barn to check the roof for leaks, she pulled out the folded sketch of the bird and tucked it into the inside seam of her new dress, just above the hem. A secret close to her skin. The next week brought snow. Not heavy, but enough to settle in the grass and mark the start of the hard season. Owen came in from the barn one evening with his coat stiff and crusted, his knuckles raw from the cold. She took the coat and hung it by the stove, pressing her hand briefly to the back of his. "You need liniment," she said. "I'll manage." "You don't have to." He didn't move when she took his hand and guided him to the chair. She knelt by the hearth, warming a tin of salve with the flat of her palm, then worked it gently across his cracked skin. He watched her without speaking, his breath steady. "You're careful with things," he said finally. "I used to get scolded for wasting supplies. Learned how to make things last. You make me wish I paid more attention to that kind of thing." She didn't look up. "You pay attention in other ways." He reached out and brushed her hair behind her ear, slow and deliberate. "You ever want children?" The question sat between them, soft and warm. "I used to," she said, voice low. "Stopped letting myself think about it after a while." "You could think about it again," he said. She looked up at him for a long time. "With you." He didn't smile, just nodded. "Only if you want to." The air inside the cabin held still, the fire snapping soft behind her. "I think I do," she whispered. He stood then, pulled her gently to her feet. They didn't kiss, not yet. But he wrapped his arms around her and held her there, his chin resting atop her head. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the warmth between them settled deeper than heat. And for the first time, Evelyn let herself imagine the years ahead not as something to endure, but as something to build. By late October, the trees behind the cabin stood bare, their branches thin as ribs against the wide Wyoming sky. A hard wind had come down from the north, and most mornings now began with Evelyn breaking ice out of the water pail before Owen rose from bed. That morning, she found him at the back of the barn with a length of timber and a measuring stick in hand. He didn't look up when she stepped in, only crouched to mark the wood with a bit of charcoal. "What's it for?" she asked, brushing hay from her skirts. "Posts," he said. "Gonna fence in a patch for seed come spring. Soil's not bad near the ridge." She crossed her arms, watching him for a moment. "You thinking wheat? Barley first. Easier to manage. Might get a few hens back too, once the ground softens." She studied him, the way he moved, slow but certain, lines of thought already laid out behind his eyes. "You were never planning to keep this place small, were you?" "I didn't see the use of more," he said, standing. "But things change." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, just full. By mid-afternoon, she brought him a warm cloth and a tin of salt pork from the stove. He took both with a nod, sinking onto the barn threshold to rest his back. "You ever think about where your people came from?" he asked, eyes on the sky. She sat beside him, careful to keep the tin level. "I know they came out of Missouri. Before that, I don't know. Papa never talked much. Mama kept a family Bible, but it was lost after the fire." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about names. For the barley field. For the ridge beyond it. Thought maybe naming things would help us keep him." She turned her head, watching the line where the grass met the sky. "What would you name it?" "Doesn't matter what I'd call it," he said, voice low. "It's yours too. Thought maybe we'd name it together." Later that week, Evelyn walked the ridge with a scrap of muslin in her pocket, pencil tucked behind her ear. She'd begun sketching in the evenings quiet outlines of the land, the way the barn leaned slightly east, the soft slope where the chickens used to run. Owen never asked what she was drawing, but she noticed he lingered at the table longer now, waiting for the sound of her pencil to slow before heading to bed. One evening after the sun had dropped behind the butte and the air turned sharp enough to sting the lungs, he came in with a package wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the table without a word, then stepped back to hang his coat. She untied the cord, fingers careful. Inside was a heavy-bound book, blank pages, stitched spine, the leather worn soft at the edges. "For drawing," he said. "Figured you'd outgrow scraps." Her throat tightened. "Where'd you find this?" "Traded with a man near the Sweetwater. Said his wife used to keep ledgers." She touched the cover, the weight of it anchoring her. "You remembered." He stepped closer, his voice quieter. "You don't talk much about what you lost." "I don't ask. But I see what you keep." She looked up at him, her heart full in a way that hurt. "You never make me feel like a wound." "You're not," he said. "You're the healing part." They stood still a long time, the fire crackling low behind them. When he reached out, it wasn't rushed. He touched her cheek with the back of his hand, then let his palm settle there, warm and steady. "I want more than winter with you," he said. "Want all the seasons." Her voice came soft. "Even the ones that hurt?" "Especially those." She pressed her hand over his, holding it in place. "Then we'll name the ridge Hope. For what we didn't expect to find." He nodded, his forehead resting against hers. Outside, the wind stirred the dry grass. Inside, the quiet stretched wide, not empty but full of everything that hadn't needed saying until now. The ground held firm through November, frost stretching long across each morning like a second skin. Evelyn moved through the cabin with a sense of quiet purpose, no longer measuring her place by silence but by muscle and memory, the way her hands reached for the right kettle without thought, the way Owen's coat hung beside hers without question. One evening, Owen returned from the ridge with a gash across his forearm, his shirt sleeve torn and stiff with blood. Evelyn met him at the threshold, her mouth tightening at the sight. "What happened?" "Fence post slipped. Caught me wrong coming down the slope. I had it tethered, just not tight enough." "Sit," she said, already pulling the basin from the shelf. He obeyed, jaw clenched as she cleaned the wound. "You're lucky it didn't tear deeper." "I've been lucky more than once," he said, eyes steady on hers. "You being the first of it." She didn't answer. Just reached for the clean muslin wrap and began securing it gently around his arm. "I've been thinking," Owen said, watching her hands move. "Come spring, we could send for lumber from Cheyenne. I could build that second room proper. Something with a window facing east." She smoothed the knot, then met his gaze. "For the child." His breath caught. "You're sure?" "I waited 2 weeks to say anything," she said. "Didn't want to speak it too soon. But I've known." He reached for her hand. "You feel all right?" "Tired in the mornings. But it passes. I think I'll be strong enough." "You'll be more than strong," he said. "You always have been." They didn't speak of names, not yet. But as the evening settled, she pulled her sketchbook from the shelf and began to draw lines, rough at first, then growing certain. A cradle. A cradle with carved rails and a broad base, steady enough to last through more than one child. Owen brought in pine from the ridge before the first snow held fast. He worked on the cradle in the barn, hands patient, movements careful even with his healing arm. Evelyn didn't ask to see it until it was done. When he brought it inside, she stood in the doorway, one hand at her belly, the other pressed to her lips. "I know it's plain," he said. "It's perfect," she whispered. They placed it near the hearth, close enough for warmth, far enough for quiet. That night, they sat side by side on the floor, backs against the wall, watching the fire throw shadows across the wood. Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever miss anything from before?" He was quiet a long moment. "Sometimes I miss the sound of my brother's fiddle. He'd play in the evenings when we were boys. Nothing fancy. Just old tunes. He'd hum them when he worked, too." "Would you hum one for me?" she asked. "I'll try," he said, voice low. And he did. Not perfectly, but true. The tune was simple, soft at first, then fuller. She closed her eyes and listened, her hand resting gently over the curve of her belly. The snow deepened in December. Evelyn's steps grew slower, and Owen took to doing more of the outside work himself. He brought in extra firewood, shoveled the path to the well, and lined the windows with spare wool to keep the drafts out. One morning, she found a small wooden box on the table. Inside was a carved hairpin, smooth and dark, with a curling edge like a fiddlehead fern. "It's for when your hair gets in the way," he said. "Figured you'd want something better than twine." She turned it over in her hand, then looked up. "You made this?" He nodded. She stepped toward him, the firelight catching in her eyes. "You always give me things I didn't know I needed. Because I watch," he said. "Not just what you say, what you don't." She reached for him then, no hesitation. Her hands found the back of his neck, drawing him down, her lips brushing his with the soft certainty of love that needed no words. He pulled her close with care, one hand at her back, the other threading into her hair. Later, she lay curled against him on the rug near the hearth, his coat draped over both of them, hearts quiet but full. The child came in early May, just after the first green shoots broke through the thawed earth. The labor was long, the pain sharp, but Evelyn bore it with the same steady resolve she'd brought to every corner of her life. Owen never left her side, not once, not even when her fingers gripped his hard enough to bruise. Their daughter arrived in the hush before dawn, lungs strong, eyes dark like her father's. Evelyn wept when they placed the child in her arms, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the deep, clean ache of joy. They named her Clara, a name Evelyn had never spoken aloud, but had carried in her heart since childhood. The days that followed passed in a rhythm of feedings and firewood, of lullabies hummed low and letters written to no one but folded between the pages of Evelyn's sketchbook. Owen carved a wooden bird for Clara's cradle, and Evelyn stitched a small quilt from scraps of her old dress and Owen's worn shirts. By midsummer, the field beyond the ridge began to show rows of barley, the soil rich from the melted snow and careful tending. Evelyn stood at the edge one morning, Clara swaddled against her chest, and watched Owen walk the rows, his hat pulled low, the sun easy against his shoulders. He turned and saw her there, and something in his face softened. He came to her slowly, brushing a kiss against Clara's brow, then one against Evelyn's temple. "We made this," he said. "All of it," she whispered. Together, they walked back to the cabin, a man and woman who had once stood at the edge of the world alone, now rooted in the land, in each other, in a life quietly and wholly built. And it was enough. It was everything.